The battlefield was alive with noise and chaos. Explosions ripped through the morning mist, sending clouds of smoke into the cold sky. Soldiers ran in all directions, shouting orders and firing their rifles. The ground trembled beneath the pounding of tanks. It was the kind of day where heroes were born, or buried. In the middle of this chaos, a small figure moved quietly along the ridge above the battlefield. He had only one eye, the other covered with a faded leather patch. His uniform was worn, his boots scuffed, and his rifle looked almost too big for him. Most soldiers passed by without even noticing him. Some even laughed at his slight frame. "That one-eyed kid? He'll be lunch for the first enemy patrol," one veteran whispered to his comrade. But the scout didn't care about their laughter. He had a job and he intended to do it perfectly. From his hidden position he scanned the enemy lines. Smoke and dust clouded his view, but his sharp eye noticed things no one else did. A small group of soldiers moving silently behind a hill, a sniper peeking from the ruins of a building, a weak point in the enemy's supply line. The soldiers below him were focused on charging, shooting, and surviving. They didn't notice the one-eyed scout. They didn't realize that this small figure, whom they mocked, could see the enemy's weaknesses better than anyone. He crouched low, moving from one shadow to another. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. He knew the enemy was dangerous and one mistake could cost him his life. But he also knew that his observation could save hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. As he watched, he began to plan. He whispered to himself, a habit he had developed over long nights alone. "If they go left, I can cut them off. If they move fast, I can lead them into my trap. They won't see it coming." The scout's mind was sharp, faster than most soldiers' reflexes. He thought in patterns and possibilities. While the army was fighting blindly, he was calculating outcomes, predicting moves, and imagining solutions. And all of it was happening while everyone else laughed at him, calling him useless. One soldier stumbled near him, nearly stepping on his foot. "Hey, move out of the way, kid," he barked. "You'll get yourself killed standing here doing nothing." The scout didn't reply. He didn't need to. Words were useless in a place like this. His actions would speak louder than anything he could say. And soon everyone would see. Suddenly a flash caught his good eye. Across the battlefield, a column of enemy soldiers was moving faster than the rest. They didn't belong to the main group. They were small, silent, almost like ghosts. The scout's heart raced. He knew something the others didn't. Something dangerous. Something that could destroy the army if ignored. He tried to warn the nearby commander through hand signals, shouting, even waving his arms. "Look, over there. They're coming." But the commander was too busy with the battle to notice. Other soldiers waved him off. "Stay out of it, kid. Focus on surviving," one shouted. The scout's stomach twisted with frustration. No one believed him. No one saw what he saw. But he didn't give up. He had trained for this moment for years. He had studied maps, enemy tactics, and old battles. And he had a plan. A secret plan that no one else could guess. He crouched lower, watching the enemy approach. His heart beat fast, but his mind was calm. He began to move, silently, quickly, preparing to set his plan into motion. He had no backup, no reinforcements. Only his instincts, his courage, and his cleverness. The enemy soldiers were getting closer. The scout could see their eyes, hear their breaths, and predict their every step. And then he noticed something, a pattern. Something the others would never see. Something that could turn the tide of this battle completely. He leaned closer, whispering under his breath, "This is it. They won't know what hit them." But before he could act, a shout rang out. "What are you doing, boy? Move or we'll leave you behind." He froze for a moment, then smiled under his patch. They still didn't understand. They still had no idea that this one-eyed scout, small and underestimated, held the key to saving countless lives. And then he saw it clearly. The enemy was moving into a trap, a place they thought was safe. Only he could see it. Only he could stop it. But would anyone listen before it was too late? The scout took a deep breath and prepared himself. His heart was steady. His mind was sharp. And in that moment he became more than a soldier. He became the unseen hand that could change the course of the battle. The wind carried the sounds of the approaching enemy. The scout's single eye narrowed. Time was running out. And no one believed him. But soon they would. The battlefield was still in chaos, but the scout had a plan forming in his mind. He had seen the enemy movement, the shadowy column that no one else had noticed. If they reached the main army, thousands of lives could be lost. But no one believed him. No one noticed what he saw. The commander, a tall, stern man with years of experience, waved his hand in frustration. "Stay where you are, boy. "You're not part of this." The scout didn't argue. Words were useless. Action was the only thing that mattered. He scanned the terrain once more. The enemy soldiers were moving faster, taking paths that were dangerous for anyone else but perfect for someone small, fast, and clever. He knew the mission was impossible. No ordinary soldier could do what he was about to attempt. No one would volunteer. But he had no choice. 50,000 lives depended on stopping this enemy column before it reached the main army. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the task pressing down on him. The scout moved quietly through the battlefield, avoiding open spaces and hiding behind broken walls and fallen trees. He observed every detail: a crate left carelessly by the enemy, a small ditch hidden by tall grass, a ruined cart that could be used as a trap. Every small detail mattered. Every tiny advantage could make the difference between life and death. As he prepared to set his plan in motion, he realized that timing would be everything. One mistake, one misstep, and the enemy would discover him. And if they did, he would be dead in seconds and the army would pay the price. He crouched behind a ruined wall and whispered to himself, "I can do this. I have to. There's no other way." Suddenly he heard footsteps. A group of soldiers, part of his own army, were moving nearby. They were struggling through the mud, carrying heavy weapons. One of them spotted him and laughed. "Look at the kid. What do you think you're doing here all alone?" the soldier shouted. The scout didn't answer. He couldn't. His plan required silence and secrecy. He just nodded slightly and watched the enemy column grow closer on the horizon. Time was running out. He had to act. With quick, calculated movements, he began setting small traps along the path the enemy was taking. Some were simple distractions. Ropes tied to crates, rocks balanced on ledges, things that would fall and make noise at the right moment. Others were more complex. Small barriers that could slow down soldiers, trip them, or lead them into dead ends. Every action was silent, precise, and dangerous. He risked his life with every step. One wrong move and the enemy could spot him. But he couldn't stop. The lives of tens of thousands of people depended on him. As he worked, he noticed something strange. The enemy was moving faster than expected. They seemed almost cautious. Almost as if they could sense something, though they didn't know what. The scout narrowed his eye. He knew his plan had to be faster, smarter, and more cunning than ever before. Suddenly he heard a shout from a nearby hill. "Scout, what are you doing? You'll get yourself killed." He ignored it. These soldiers didn't understand. They didn't see the danger, the precision, the need for timing. They couldn't understand that one small, clever person could outsmart an entire enemy unit. Minutes passed and the scout worked tirelessly. He moved like a shadow, unseen but always present. He placed the last distraction, a small, carefully timed device that would mislead the enemy into thinking they were surrounded. He took a deep breath and retreated to a hidden spot to watch. Then it happened. The enemy soldiers reached the first trap. A crate toppled with a loud crash and several soldiers jumped, looking around in confusion. Others stumbled into small pits and ditches the scout had prepared. Their formation broke. Panic began to spread. The scout's heart raced. This was only the beginning. He had to guide them carefully, lead them into the places he had chosen, and keep them confused long enough for the main army to prepare. But he couldn't do it openly. No one could know he was controlling this from the shadows. He whispered under his breath, "Come on. Come on." The enemy soldiers moved forward, falling into the traps one by one. The scout adjusted small rocks and hidden barriers to guide them further. His plan was working. Slowly, carefully, the impossible mission was coming to life. But just as he thought he had control, a shout rang out from the enemy line. "Stop them. They're trying to trick us." The scout froze. The enemy was suspicious now. If they discovered his traps, the mission could fail and countless lives would be lost. He had only moments to act. With quick thinking, he adjusted the next distraction, making it seem accidental, natural. He whispered, "This is it. The final move." As the enemy column moved forward, the scout's traps guided them perfectly into the positions he had planned. The enemy had no idea they were walking into danger, no idea that one small, underestimated scout was controlling their every step. And then, just as he watched the last soldiers approach the final trap, a sudden shadow fell over him. Another enemy scout had appeared, looking directly at him. Their eyes met for a moment, a tense stare that could decide life or death. The scout knew he had to act fast. This was the ultimate test. If he failed now, everything he had done would be useless. But if he succeeded, he could save 50,000 lives. With a deep breath, he prepared his next move, knowing that the impossible mission had only just begun. The scout's heart pounded in his chest, but his movements were calm and precise. Every breath, every step, every glance had a purpose. He had lured the enemy into the first trap successfully, but the hardest part was still ahead. He had to guide them further, deeper into a web they could not escape. He called it his ghost trick, a plan so clever that no one would see it coming. The enemy column was disoriented now. Soldiers stumbled over hidden pits, crates toppled over, and strange noises echoed across the battlefield. Some whispered nervously to one another, thinking the traps were the work of ghosts or spirits. That was exactly what the scout wanted. Fear and confusion were powerful weapons. From his hidden vantage point, he watched carefully. He had set small markers that only he could see, scratches on rocks, bent branches, faint lines in the dirt. They guided his movements and told him exactly where to place the next distractions. He moved silently, like a shadow among shadows, placing small devices and obstacles to mislead the enemy. A tripwire here, a crate balanced there, a trail of broken branches in the opposite direction, all designed to confuse and divide them. He had to be perfect. One wrong move and the column could reorganize and escape. Or worse, they could spot him and attack. The scout's mind raced with possibilities. Every decision had consequences. Every action had to be timed perfectly. The enemy seemed smart, but they were also predictable. That predictability was his advantage. He smiled beneath his patch, knowing that while they believed themselves in control, he was the one controlling everything from the shadows. Suddenly, a group of enemy soldiers broke off from the main column. They had noticed some of the earlier traps and were moving cautiously, trying to investigate. The scout froze for a moment, calculating. This could ruin everything. But then he remembered his training. Improvisation was his strength. He grabbed a small pouch from his belt and threw it near a fallen tree. A cloud of smoke rose instantly, covering his movement. He darted to the side and placed a loose plank across a shallow ditch. When the soldiers returned, the plank would shift under their weight, causing a minor stumble. Nothing deadly, but enough to make them nervous. Enough to make them doubt themselves. The scout's good eye scanned the horizon. The main army was still far behind, unaware of the shadow game unfolding in front of them. If the enemy regrouped before reinforcements arrived, the mission could fail. Time was running out. But the scout didn't panic. Panic never helped him. Only precision, only cleverness, only the ghost trick could save so many lives. The enemy column moved cautiously, their attention caught by the strange sounds and sudden obstacles. Soldiers whispered among themselves. "Is this some kind of trap?" one said nervously. Another shook his head, trying to stay brave, but fear had begun to spread. And fear, the scout knew, was the first step toward victory. He moved closer to the enemy without being seen. His single eye watched them like a hawk. He could see the fear growing in their faces, the hesitation in their steps. The ghost trick was working. They were walking into the paths he had carefully prepared, unaware of who controlled them or why. But then came the dangerous part. A sudden shout from the enemy's rear startled him. Another enemy scout had spotted movement nearby. The scout froze, calculating quickly. He couldn't engage directly, it would reveal him and ruin everything. He had to distract, mislead, and vanish, all in one. With lightning speed, he grabbed a fallen branch and tossed it into a nearby bush. The enemy scout turned instantly toward the sound. The scout moved silently behind a ridge, out of sight. He had used the environment, his shadows, and the enemy's assumptions to his advantage. That was the ghost trick in action, using fear, misdirection, and cleverness to control the battlefield without firing a single shot. A small smile appeared on his face. He had done it before, but never on this scale. The column ahead, over 50 soldiers strong, was now confused, divided, and terrified. Every step they took was guided by him. They didn't see him, didn't know he existed, and yet he held complete control. Suddenly, a faint noise reached him, shouts, explosions, gunfire. Reinforcements from the main army were arriving. Perfect timing. The enemy was about to be caught in a trap they didn't even realize existed. But the scout had to keep them in place for a few more minutes. One false move could ruin everything. He crouched low, watching as one group of soldiers fell into a pit he had hidden under branches. Another group stumbled over a fallen log. The rest hesitated, unsure where to go next. He whispered under his breath, "Just a little more, just a little longer." Every second felt like an hour. The scout's pulse was steady, his movements silent. He adjusted small obstacles, nudged branches, and silently guided the enemy further into his trap. He felt the weight of 50,000 lives on his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. He was small, underestimated, and alone. But in that moment he was the most powerful person on the battlefield. And then, as the enemy reached the edge of the trap he had so carefully prepared, the scout took a deep breath. Everything had gone according to plan so far. The ghost trick was working perfectly. But the final act, the most dangerous part, was still ahead. One wrong move now and it could all collapse. The scout's single eye narrowed, scanning the enemy soldiers, the battlefield, and the paths he had prepared. Silence fell around him, broken only by the distant sounds of battle. The enemy was moving exactly where he wanted. The ghost trick had begun, but the story was far from over. The scout whispered under his breath, "This is only the beginning. They don't even know what's coming." The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the battlefield in shades of gray and gold. The enemy column was still moving cautiously, unaware that they were walking straight into a trap. The scout crouched behind a broken wall, his one eye scanning every shadow, every movement. Silence surrounded him, broken only by distant gunfire and the occasional rumble of a tank. 4 hours he had guided the enemy using his ghost trick. Every trap, every obstacle, every distraction had been placed with careful precision. Yet now, as the pale sunlight touched the battlefield, he realized how close danger had come. One false step, one sound too loud, and the enemy could discover him. One wrong moment and his mission, and the lives of 50,000 people, could be lost. The scout moved carefully, low to the ground, observing the enemy from a ridge. The soldiers were more alert now. Their pace slowed and their whispers grew louder. "Something's not right," one muttered. Another shook his head. "It's like someone is watching us." The scout smirked beneath his patch. Exactly. That was the point. Fear and doubt were his greatest allies. Suddenly, a patrol broke away from the main group. They moved faster than the others, scanning the surrounding hills and ridges. The scout froze. They were heading straight toward his position. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic was the enemy of precision. He ducked behind a shattered wall and stayed still as the patrol passed. A branch cracked under a soldier's foot, and the scout held his breath, praying they didn't hear it. The patrol stopped, heads turning toward the sound. The scout thought quickly. He grabbed a loose rock and threw it far to the side. The patrol lunged toward the sound. Problem solved. The scout exhaled silently. Even with that danger past, the mission was far from over. The enemy column was still moving and he had to keep them on the path he had set. He darted from one shadow to another, adjusting small obstacles. A crate tipped slightly, a fallen branch nudged into place, a faint line in the dirt redirected the soldiers. Every move had to be perfect. One misstep now could reveal him and destroy everything. As he worked, he noticed a group of enemy soldiers pausing near a shallow ditch. They had spotted a few of his traps and were trying to move carefully. The scout realized they were learning from his actions. That could ruin the plan. He needed to act fast. He scanned the surrounding area and spotted a ruined cart half buried in the mud. It was heavy, but he had trained for situations like this. Using all his strength, he pushed the cart just enough so it would fall over at the right moment. The next group of soldiers would stumble over it, giving him the advantage he needed. Then came the most dangerous moment yet. A shadow fell across the scout. Another enemy soldier had climbed the ridge above him. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, both frozen in recognition. The scout knew he had seconds to act, or die. He dropped to the side, letting the shadows hide him. The enemy soldier stepped forward, suspicious. The scout's mind raced. He couldn't fight openly. He couldn't reveal himself. His only option was cleverness. He grabbed a loose stone and flicked it into a pile of rubble far away. The soldier turned immediately, cursing under his breath, and the scout slipped past unnoticed. Breathing heavily, he continued guiding the enemy. He knew that every second counted. The main army was still far behind. If he failed now, the enemy would regroup and strike with full force. But the scout didn't falter. He was small, underestimated, and alone, but he had something stronger than numbers or weapons. He had his mind, his courage, and his ghost trick. The enemy was almost in position. The scout had led them through obstacles, traps, and diversions. They were confused, divided, and nervous. Fear had taken hold, and the soldiers moved hesitantly, unsure of every step. That hesitation was exactly what he needed. A sudden shout rang out from the enemy line. "There! In the shadows! Move!" Panic spread quickly, but the scout stayed calm. He moved silently behind another ridge, placing the last minor distraction he could manage before reinforcements arrived. Every action guided the enemy perfectly toward the spot he had prepared. Then as dawn fully broke, the scout paused to watch. The enemy was nearly where he wanted them. Traps and obstacles had slowed them, and fear had made them predictable. He allowed himself a brief smile. The ghost trick was working better than he had hoped. But the danger was far from over. The enemy soldiers were close to discovering some of the traps. Reinforcements were still minutes away. And he was alone. His body ached from hours of crouching, running, and lifting obstacles, but he pushed the pain aside. 50,000 lives rested on his shoulders, and he could not fail. The scout whispered to himself almost as a promise, "Hold on, just a little longer. Don't fail now." From the ridge, he could see the first light of the main army approaching. Soon the enemy would be caught completely and his mission would succeed. But before that moment he had to survive the closest call of his life. He crouched low, watching the enemy stumble into the traps he had prepared, every step guided by his skill and courage. The scout's single eye narrowed. Sweat dripped down his brow. The battlefield was quiet for a moment, except for the distant shouts and gunfire. He had led them here, he had tricked them, but the final act, the ultimate moment of danger, was still ahead. One wrong move now and it could all collapse. And in that moment the scout realized something that only he could see. The enemy was learning. They were adapting. His ghost trick was working, but it needed one final, perfect stroke to succeed. The scout took a deep breath, steadying his body, steadying his mind. The enemy column was almost in position, the traps were ready, and the reinforcements were close. Now the impossible part of his mission, the final daring act, was about to begin. The battlefield was quiet for a moment, the sun climbing higher and casting long shadows across the ruins and trenches. The enemy column, confused, divided, and exhausted, had reached the final area the scout had prepared. Every trap, every obstacle, every distraction had worked perfectly. His ghost trick had guided them here, unseen, unknown, but in complete control. The scout crouched behind a broken wall, his single eye scanning every movement. He could see their fear, their hesitation, their confusion. And he smiled beneath his patch. They thought they were in control, but they were exactly where he wanted them. Every step they had taken was part of his invisible plan. From the ridge above, he could see the first reinforcements of the main army approaching. Soldiers carrying rifles, tanks rolling forward, artillery booming in the distance. Soon the enemy would find themselves completely trapped, with no escape. But the scout knew he had to be patient. If the enemy realized what had happened too soon, the advantage could be lost. Timing, as always, was everything. A shout rang out from the enemy ranks. "What is this? Are we surrounded?" Panic spread instantly. Soldiers tripped over hidden obstacles, fell into pits, and collided with each other in confusion. The scouts' traps had slowed them, guided them, and made them predictable. Now their own fear completed the trap he had designed. He allowed himself a brief nod. The ghost trick was working exactly as he had imagined. But the final stroke, the moment that would turn disbelief into awe, was still ahead. The enemy had to see, finally, that one small, underestimated figure had controlled everything without ever stepping into the open. The scout adjusted a small pile of debris, just enough to make a loud crash when the enemy stumbled onto it. The sound echoed across the battlefield and the enemy froze. Every soldier looked around, eyes wide, trying to understand what was happening. They whispered to each other, some in fear, some in disbelief. "It's a ghost. Someone is controlling us." The scout crouched lower, observing. His plan had always been to remain invisible, but now he realized the time had come to show just enough of himself to finish the mission. He moved slightly, a shadow shifting behind a broken wall. Just enough so the enemy could sense him, but not enough to attack. Their fear sharpened, their hesitation grew, and they moved exactly where he wanted them. The reinforcements arrived. Soldiers ran into position, guns aimed, tanks rumbling into place. Artillery opened fire on key enemy positions, but only where the scout had planned. He had guided the enemy into a position where even superior numbers could not save them. His calculations, his observations, and his traps had made this possible. The enemy tried to fight back, but every move they made was anticipated. They stumbled over obstacles, ran into pits, and collided with each other in confusion. Panic ruled them completely. And in the midst of it all, the scout remained unseen, the invisible hand controlling the battlefield. Then came the moment of revelation. The enemy's commander, a tall man with a sharp uniform and a stern face, ran forward, trying to rally his soldiers. He looked around in disbelief. How did this happen? Who is doing this? The scout's single eye gleamed under his patch. He stepped slightly into the sunlight, allowing a brief shadow of his figure to be seen from a distance. Not enough to attack him, but enough to leave an impression. The commander stared, frozen in shock, unable to comprehend that a single, underestimated scout had orchestrated the entire chaos. The main army began to advance fully, rounding up the disoriented enemy. Soldiers cheered quietly, realizing that the enemy had walked straight into a trap that had been invisible until now. The scout's traps, his clever distractions, his ghost trick, had worked perfectly. 50,000 lives were safe. The scout crouched low again, watching the aftermath. The enemy soldiers were captured, their formation broken, their morale destroyed. And all of it had been done by one small figure, one eye, one mind that no one had believed could matter. He allowed himself a brief smile. The impossible mission, the task that no one thought could be done, had succeeded. And the world would soon know, if not today then tomorrow, that courage, intelligence, and careful planning could change the course of history. The scout watched as the commander of the main army approached the trapped enemies, shaking his head in disbelief. He looked up toward the ridge, scanning for the one responsible. His eyes fell briefly on the scout's shadow, a figure small, one-eyed, almost invisible. He squinted. Could it be? The scout slipped back into the shadows, allowing only the briefest hint of his presence. The legend of the ghost trick, the one-eyed scout, would grow from whispers to awe and eventually history. And in that moment the scout realized something. Even the smallest, most overlooked person could change the fate of thousands. Even a single soldier, underestimated and ignored, could control the outcome of a battle, save countless lives and leave a mark on history. The battlefield was quiet now, except for distant shouts and the movement of the main army. The scout crouched low, his mission complete for the moment, his ghost trick revealed only in part, his identity still mostly unknown. But his impact was undeniable. He had done the impossible. He had changed the course of the day. And soon, the world would know the story of the one-eyed scout whose cleverness, courage, and ghost trick had saved 50,000 lives. The battlefield was quiet now. Smoke drifted slowly over the trenches and ruins, the echoes of gunfire fading into the distance. The enemy column, disoriented and broken, had been captured or scattered. The main army moved carefully through the battlefield, securing the area and checking for survivors. The impossible mission had succeeded. 50,000 lives had been saved. The one-eyed scout crouched low behind a pile of rubble, watching it all unfold. He was tired, every muscle aching from hours of crouching, running, and lifting obstacles. His clothes were torn, his boots caked with mud, and sweat dripped down his face. Yet, beneath his patch, his good eye gleamed with quiet pride. He had done what no one thought possible. Soldiers from the main army began to notice the strange chain of events. The traps, the obstacles, the confusion. It all made sense now. One small, underestimated figure had guided the enemy into defeat. The scout's ghost trick had worked perfectly. Slowly, whispers began to spread among the ranks. "Did you see that?" one soldier asked. "It's like someone controlled the enemy without being seen." "Who could do something like that?" another replied. "It had to be one person, someone small, clever, unseen." The scout allowed himself a small smile. He remained hidden just long enough for the whispers to grow, for the awe to spread. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward, revealing himself to those nearby. The soldiers froze, recognizing the tiny, one-eyed figure who had made the impossible possible. The commander of the army approached, his face a mixture of disbelief and admiration. It was you?" he asked, voice low but filled with respect. "All of this, your traps, your guidance, it was your plan?" The scout nodded quietly. He didn't speak much. Words had little meaning compared to the actions he had taken. His plan had saved lives, and that was enough. The commander's eyes widened. He looked at the scout with new understanding. "I never believed anyone could do this alone. But you changed everything." Word spread quickly through the army. The soldiers who had once laughed at him now looked with respect, some even bowing slightly. They realized that courage, intelligence, and determination could come in the smallest, most overlooked package. The scout had become more than a soldier. He had become a legend. The enemy prisoners were gathered and questioned. They spoke of confusion, fear, and traps they could not see. "It was like ghosts guided us," one whispered. Another added, "We were fools. One small figure controlled everything without us knowing." The scout listened quietly. He had expected this reaction. His ghost trick had worked exactly as planned. Later, the commander called him aside. "You have done something remarkable today. 50,000 lives, saved by a single person. You have my respect and the respect of this entire army." "We underestimated you and we were wrong." The scout only nodded. He didn't need praise. The lives saved, the mission completed, the enemy defeated, that was reward enough. Yet he felt something stir inside him, a quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you have done the impossible. As the sun climbed higher, the scout looked out over the battlefield. Smoke drifted lazily over the ruins, the cries of injured soldiers echoed faintly, and the army moved steadily forward. For most, it was just another battle. But for him, it was a story that would never be forgotten. He had been overlooked, underestimated, ignored, but he had made a difference. One small, clever mind had changed the fate of tens of thousands. Soldiers began to gather around, patting him on the back, clapping him on the shoulder, and asking questions. He smiled quietly, answering with few words, letting his actions speak louder than any explanation. He had shown that bravery, intelligence, and determination could overcome even the greatest odds. Finally, as the battlefield settled and the reinforcements secured the area, the scout stepped back, looking at the horizon. He had done what no one thought possible. He had led the enemy into confusion, protected countless lives, and proved that even the smallest, most overlooked person could become a hero. And in that moment he realized something profound. Legends are not born from strength or size alone. They are born from courage, cleverness, and the willingness to act when everyone else doubts you. The one-eyed scout had become such a legend. A hero whose ghost trick had saved 50,000 lives, and whose story would echo through time. The army continued its march, the enemy defeated, the battlefield finally calm. And the scout, small and quiet, disappeared into the shadows once more. Not for glory, not for fame, but because he knew the world needed more heroes, unseen and underestimated, ready to act when it mattered most. The story of the one-eyed scout would be told for generations. A story of courage, intelligence, and hope. A story proving that even the smallest, quietest person can change history. And in the silence that followed the battle, one truth remained clear. The one-eyed scout had not just survived, he had saved a world.